Hi, I'm Will Ford, and I'm on the Keith Andrew Network. I just want to tell you he's doing an amazing job, and I tell you what, you got to tune in. You will learn a lot, and you won't regret it.
Hey, my name is Keith Andrew, and thank you for supporting the Keith Andrew Network. We're now available on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. For people who want to know what is the Keith Andrew Network, the whole point of my talk show is to show you that even with having a learning disability, I can still amount to something. And at the same time, I'm able to turn myself into an example for people out there dealing with any types of learning disabilities and disabilities to never give up and prove people wrong. Prove to them that labels do not dictate who you are and who you're going to be, so prove them and still amount to something. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Keith Andrew Network. I am your host, Keith Andrew. This is episode 1065. That is right, 1065, available on all social medias. The first thing I want to say to you is thank you for your service, and it's a real honor and privilege to have you here on a great brand that is the Keith Andrew Network.
Thank you for having me, Keith. It's an honor to be here.
Now the honor's all mine. First question I want to ask you, I have the top 15 questions that I want to talk to you about. And you can throw in anything you want. I have no cards on my sleeve. So the first question I want to ask you is tell our audience a little bit about yourself and a little about your background.
Okay, well, I grew up in Savannah, Georgia. So I'm a native to Georgia, and my father had grown up in an orphanage, and then years later, he had been asked to come back and be the director of that orphanage. So I kind of grew up with about 200 brothers, if you want to call it that. And it was a very unique experience. We had horses and cattle, and it was right on the water there, right in Savannah. So it was definitely a unique childhood. Um, I'm a U.S. military veteran, and I'll get to that in a minute. But acting I'm an actor. So my story and journey in acting began when I was little, and I grew up acting in plays and those kinds of things. When I got to high school, I wanted to be an pursue it full time in college. And my drama teacher went to my dad and my mom and dad and said, "Hey, you need to really try to get him to pursue this." And my dad said, "Absolutely not." He said, "There's no way." I asked my mom years later, it's like, why did dad take that attitude? And she's like, well, at the time, he didn't think you were ready for that kind of thing. And he was afraid that one, you'd be successful and it would ruin you. And then he said, then he thought you might be a failure and it would still ruin you. So I think there was a lot of wisdom in that at the time, although I really would have liked to have pursued it in college and tried to pursue, Juilliard or not everybody gets into Juilliard, but my drama teachers were like, he really needs to pursue acting full time. Dad said no, and I was going to get a real education and a real job. And so I went off to college, small college, and played some small college football up in Indiana. And I ended up leaving after my first year, and I did the next thing my dad didn't want me to do, and I joined the Marine Corps. So I spent I spent 5 years in the Marine Corps, and then I was recruited into the U.S. Army. I was in Desert Storm. I went to Desert Storm. Skipped over that big part of my life, and came back, and then the Army recruited me for Army Criminal Investigation Command. And so I was an undercover CID investigator for 2 years, and did that. And still all this time, acting is back on the back burner. Um, what was interesting is I kind of jumped ahead, but when I went off to college and played a year in football, I took a drama class, even though my dad didn't want me to. And my professor at the time, he was again trying to encourage me, hey, you should pursue this full time. And I was like, no, I can't. My dad would kill me. It's just not going to happen. So when I told him I was quitting school and joining the Marine Corps, he was like, he thought I was ruining my life and all of that kind of thing. But I found out years later that that same drama coach, he had spent like 20 years as a federal agent and kind of had that part of his life hidden. And for me, after I left the Army, working undercover for 2 years, I went on and became a police detective. And then when 9/11 happened, I was recruited to be a federal air marshal. And so I worked undercover on the planes for 20 years. Just retired 2 years ago and jumped back into acting. And I'm with AMT here in Atlanta Models and Talent. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
No, absolutely. And again, I'm not saying this to kiss your ass or anything, and it's uncensored, but I appreciate everything you did for this country. I just want to say thank you for your service.
Oh, well, thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Also, the reason I bring it up is I interviewed a couple other Marines who are in the Army. Maybe you would be interested in joining us for a special episode.
Sure, absolutely. I'm sure that would probably be pretty fun.
So, if you don't mind me for asking, because I normally don't have veterans on the show, what was it like during Desert Storm?
Well, it was a strange time because everybody's aware of biblical prophecy. And so, the Bible talks about, conflict in the Middle East, and of course it's playing out. But at the time, everybody was scared. It's like really before Desert Storm, you had Grenada, but before that, it was Vietnam. And in fact, when we were in Desert Storm, I mean, I served with guys, Vietnam veterans. They were there with us when this was Desert Storm was the last war that they used the classic battleships from World War II. And so everybody kind of thought it was Armageddon. It was like there was a little bit of hysteria, to some degree because we didn't know what was going to happen. All we knew was, this was pre-internet, so we knew a little bit from watching TV, but the next thing you know, it's like we're getting 30 shots in 48 hours in our arms, and we're practicing. That was the big thing for us, was we started training with some serious equipment and explosives that we don't normally train with all the time, and we were trained in them, but they're kind of expensive to use every day. So when we're going to the range and we're blowing these certain amount of explosives or whatever in training, we kind of knew at that point, hey, this is real. So when we went over there, it was a little bit of how far were we going to go? Were we going to march all the way to Baghdad? And I'm not one that gets very political and second guess people that are at that high level in the food chain. But I kind of tend to think, looking back now, if we had gone all the way, maybe there wouldn't have been a 20-year war that lasted down the road. There's been a lot of blood and treasure that's been spilt, and we were only allowed to go so far, and then they cut it off. But it was definitely something that's burned into my mind, and I mean literally burned into my mind for the rest of my life.
No, I agree with you 100%. We don't have to talk about political things if you don't want to, but don't hold it against me, don't hold it against you, because
Oh no,
I
no.
like hearing people's opinions. And you probably got to think I'm an idiot for this, but hey, I have a disability, so I have enough problems. The war, when George W. Bush Jr. made up, first off, I don't know. My dad thinks he's the type of guy, he's laid back. He's the type of guy that you won't have a drink with. Not my dad, Junior, and
Oh
because
yeah, yeah.
he's the cowboy.
Right.
Do I think that he should have been charged? prosecuted on war crimes? Absolutely. What he should have done was tell people the truth. Did he upset people in the Middle East? He sure did. If he never stuck his freaking head up his ass and he's like, "Oh, we're gonna get weapons of mass destruction. It's gonna be wonderful." To be no ISIS, to be no Al Qaeda, or they would be around, but to be no ISIS, and Andre wouldn't have the shit we have today for the most part. I would have left Saddam and your Daffy alone. They're gonna do whatever they're going to do on their side of the world. All that matters is helping your own country. Help the homeless, but help the mentally ill. Do what you need to. The problem is when you start trying to be the police officer of every single country and get involved in things that I'm a perfect candidate. I'm not a politician. Politics is the last thing I need to talk about. But if you try to inject yourself into a situation, you're only going to make it worse. So that's to leave it alone. And sometimes it's better off not touching it.
Well, I respect your opinion, and I definitely think there are nuances. I think a lot of these things, when we sit down and look at them, they're a lot more complicated and harder to unpack. It's easy for us as a culture, and we do as a culture, jump on causes that hit home to us, and we may or may not know all of the facts that play into it. It may appear to be a certain set of facts, and there may be elements of truth about those facts. But if we get tunnel vision and we don't see, for example, I do think that there would have been an Al Qaeda and other terrorist organizations, and they would have grown and spread, and we're seeing that now. I'm of the opinion that when you drag out a cut, it's like a slow bleed.
Yeah.
You can make it fester and make it worse, or you can cut it off. When I was growing up, when we would misbehave, my mom, she was quick with the backhand. Now I joke with her and tell her that she'd be locked up, and reported to children's services because it went. And I was kind of a little wild little child. I was strong willed, and so I deserved many of my little smackings. But my mom would not even hesitate at one point if I was running my mouth at the table, if I was doing something I wouldn't. It was just like, psh, you know, and it's like that. There wasn't a discussion. There wasn't a if you don't stop that, it was a psh, smack, and I knew right away. And so when you have people that are oppressing their own people or cultures or people of other nations, you have to act. And war is never pretty. I don't know of any war that's been pretty or moral. There's going to be death and destruction. That's what war is. And I think that humanity overall is always going to suffer when we go to war, period. And I don't think wars. I happen to be a Christian. I have a strong faith. That's me. I don't push my faith on anyone. But I do believe that on this side of heaven, human beings are inherently flawed. And when it comes to politics, my opinion is it's not unique. Those of us that have served in the military and served in government work will all tell you politically, I think both sides share a fair amount of worthlessness.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to be honest. There are elite people in whatever political group you espouse, and at the very top, and there is a fundamentally flawed culture in our political system where they look down on everyone else.
Well,
I
what do you
saw it.
Oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, we get caught up in their circus where you got to be Democrat, you got to be Republican. And those of us that have worked in the military, we know and sit back and go, they're all full of crap
Yeah.
at that level. Most, I don't want to say all. There's some good people that have served, but I don't think that career politicians is what our founding fathers had in mind. I don't at all.
No, yeah, I agree with you 100%. 10 years ago when I started my talk show, I said people who are mentally ill, people who are bipolar, who are criminals, should be banned from having firearms. Now everyone's getting a gun, and not, we can always talk about something else, but that's
Right.
part of the problem. I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm an independent because the Republicans are batshit crazy and the Democrats are spineless. So, and you're caught right in the freaking middle of I don't know who to go with because both sides are full of crap. And then I don't know, it's a sign of mental illness. And it's kind of fitting that I should say that because people say I'm retarded. But I look around at the media, the city where you have people subway surfing, you have drive-by shootings. It's like you're living in a Mad Max movie. And it's kind of like, where do you draw the line of saying it's messed up, but we need to do something?
Uh, yeah. Again, I go back to and I don't want to talk forever about
Yeah.
politics, but I think these issues are very very complicated and they're not, you can't narrow them down. For example, I'll throw this out there. People that say guns are bad. Okay, guns were invented for primarily originally one thing: war. They have found other uses, but generally, I do believe that when you're looking at at the end of the day, you're looking at a chunk of metal, and it's one grade up from a sword, right?
Yeah.
So it's men have been inventing ways to kill each other from since the dawn of time. So when we focus on the implement and we ignore what's actually going on in the heart and the depravity of the mind, that is festering, infecting cultures worldwide. Then we kind of lose our ability to be able to solve the problem. Um, you can make the same argument about drunk driving. Okay, take away cars, drunk driving will be ended. Now, nobody's suggesting that that's a rational solution, and we definitely don't need people walking around with machine guns.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. But when we start focusing in microscope on an inanimate object and we ignore the human beings that are, you can ban guns tomorrow and men will figure out, and I say men, I mean humankind, will figure out other ways to kill each other. They will. And we definitely got a gun issue, I believe, that needs to be looked at in the United States. But we also have a lot of laws in the books that don't get enforced. So we need to really look at what's going on inside of us as people before we can solve a problem such as that. So
No, absolutely. I promise you we will do a part two. I didn't mean to talk about the one thing that caught my interest was you were in the army. And I'm like, you know what? I would like to talk about the army. And I meant to
okay.
do it like for 5, 10 minutes, but I try to do something different for every audience member. It isn't just, the same 15 questions over and over.
Oh,
It's
it's okay.
you wanted to be spontaneous. You wanted to be entertaining, but we will definitely do a part two, and we actually will do the sit down with the Keith Andrew Network as soon as you wrapped up. But I want to ask you a serious question.
Yeah.
For people who play video games, especially those first person shooters, do you think, in your honest opinion, do you think first person shooter games should be banned? And do they have a negative effect on you?
I mean, again, I'd rather talk about acting, but I will tell you, one, I'm not a scientist.
Yes.
So I want to say that right up front. I'm not a social scientist. I'm a human being, and so I can draw opinions. Um, I do think that this world is desensitized, if you want to say, to blood and violence and whatever. And there's an element that if you garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
So can I attack I don't play video games. I'm from the age where you put quarters in Pac-Man. So I'm a little bit of a dinosaur when it comes to that. But I haven't seen any hard data, and I'm not a scientist to look at this. But common sense wise, what you put in your brain, it's going to come out. And if you have the breakdown of families and homes, and you absorb or young children absorb what they absorb, it's going to come out. So there's definitely, it would make sense that there's a correlation, but to say this or that needs to be banned, I don't play those games. So I'm just going off of the description of active shooter. As somebody who trained in counterterrorism specifically for active shooters, yeah, I mean, I have an opinion from a law enforcement standpoint that I don't think that those are healthy combinations for young minds who have not developed to be absorbing. So
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I used to play those Grand Theft Auto games in St. Rose, and I thought, oh, it's cool, so cool. You run around, you shoot people, you blow things up. It's a game. And when I got to where I was about 18, when I turned 20, I was like, you know what? It's really starting to have a mental effect on me. And like I said, like you said, we're in the same boat. I know there's a kind of like an age difference, but since, and you look good by your age, by, for the record, but I'm just saying, when I started my talk show, I kind of pulled myself away from the video games. And if I had never played a video game ever again for the rest of my life, I wouldn't care. But for me, because I have ADD, ADHD, I'm the type of person who has to be involved, doing videos, doing interviews, creating helpful things, and be a useful person. If then you have a positive effect. But if you got to sit away and play, yeah, these games that may or may not have a mental effect on you, psychologically, it's kind of like, what are you doing with your life? If that makes any sense.
oh
But
yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you.
I do have a couple questions for you off the air, but with the last 5 minutes, I'm going to pass it over to you. Was there anything you wanted to promote? Any funny stories you wanted to share?
Oh, I don't know. I probably would have to sit there and think about them. But I'd say the most remarkable experience for me in the last year, as far as acting, was auditioning in person with Francis Ford Coppola and getting a call back, because it just, there are actors that go their whole lives, just to have a small role in one of his films. And I'm nobody. So, I mean, as far as, I'm not famous or anything like that. And I've been, um, a civil servant essentially for the last 34 years of my life. And I started acting 10 years ago, but I had an opportunity to audition in person with Francis Ford Coppola. And lo and behold, I got home, and there was an email saying, hey, he wants to see you again back in Atlanta in person. And they sent me sides for two roles for this movie. Megalopolis is the movie. And well, I was nervous, as anybody would be. And I went up there, and he read with me in person in the audition, which, it's The Godfather. He's with me. And it just like all the actor stories. I mean, it was a dark room, and there was a table, and then a little light in the back, and it's like, it was like a scene out of The Godfather. I'm sure if he ever hears this, he'll probably laugh. But I did my audition, and I left out of there, and it was so funny because I got back in my truck and I was driving home, and I was like, you know what, I feel pretty good. I think I did really good. And it took me an hour and a half or so to drive home. And when I got home, by the time I got home, I convinced myself that I'd sucked. And I was like, oh, I sucked. I blew it. And I didn't hear anything for a month. And so then I realized, like, just, hey, at least, I got to audition in person with Francis Ford Coppola. And, but then I got an email from Bright Daniels Casting offering me the role. What was interesting is that they kept kind of secret what my actual, because you read dummy sides, you don't know that you're going to actually do what you read for. And I didn't know what part I knew what part I got, but I didn't know who my scene was with, or you don't get to see the sides. They keep it all, So it was all the way up until the pretty close to filming before I got my sides. And when I looked on the call sheet, it was like, oh my goodness, it's one-on-one with the number one cast member. And the star of this film is Adam Driver, which for me was fantastic because Adam was a Marine. And so, my biggest role up to that. So, up to this point here, I get to, not only did it, I get to audition with, a legendary director, but for me, share the scene with the star of the film, who's also a Marine. And it was, let's just say, it was an amazing experience. Mr. Coppola is extremely gracious and kind man, and he asks your opinion, and it's like, he doesn't need my opinion. I worked for the government for 34 years. Nobody asked me my opinion in 34 years. It was, in fact, it was like, just shut up and do your job. But no, this legendary creative director actually asked my opinion on set, and so that was amazing. So.
No, absolutely. Now we're gonna go overtime. I do have a couple questions for you off the air. But actually, one thing I saw about your wife actually was from The Notebook.
Oh yeah. She sure was.
And if she's interested, she's more than welcome to be on my show. Maybe we can do like a double interview or something.
Yeah, I'll talk to her about that.
No, absolutely. Now stay tuned for Off the Air. The next segment, when we come back from this commercial break, will be on Instagram and TikTok. It's the Sit Down with Keith Andrew. Wrapping up our interview segment. It was a real honor and privilege having you as a guest. I hope I made a good impression on you, and I'm looking forward to part 2 down the road. Until we meet again, catch you later. Thank you, and have a good night.